Thank you very much. So Sam Longman, I'm Head of Sustainability and Environment at Transport for London, also Deputy Chair of the London Climate Ready Partnership, which is a cross-sector partnership trying to accelerate climate change adaptation in London. Perhaps we could go on to the first slide. So I'm very pleased to be here today. I'm not an expert on health and heat, which I did point out when I was asked to come along. But I did want to talk about what we're doing to accelerate climate change adaptation and TfL, sustainability generally. I think there's a lot of kind of parallels with the theme of health. For me, sustainability is ultimately about fair and equitable improvement of health of people. And also, similar to health, there is no goal. It's not like we've achieved sustainability or this thing is sustainable, this thing isn't sustainable. It's about continual improvement. You eat an apple, you might be a bit healthier. If you just eat apples, you'll be unhealthy. And I think that's a real mindset shift we need when we're talking about the climate emergency. The problem we've got, I think, is because there's this target for net zero, there's this mindset that everything is about a target. And if we just achieve that, that's job done, we can get back to BAU. But it's never going to be like that. It's about living in harmony with each other and with nature and continual improvement. And I'm really pleased to be here because I'm absorbing much more than I'll transmit, because it's about acceleration of maturity. There's so much we don't know about specifically how climate change will impact our assets, our operations, our people, and we really need to accelerate that quickly, and you have to work on it. It's decades behind the decarbonisation agenda and much more complex. So if we, I'm in charge. Right, so what we do have the advantage of is the brilliant London Resilience Review led by Emma Howard-Boyd, who's here today as it happens, that really set out very clearly the challenges we face in London, but also 50 really solid recommendations for what we need to do to accelerate this agenda, improve resilience and adapt. So London's climate risks are kind of diverse, and it's one of the challenges is like, what are we actually aiming for? Because really it's about increasing extremes with a kind of underlying trend. And that's another challenge is when you look at these numbers, people are like, well, this doesn't seem like a problem. But really, this should be thought of in terms of a level of risk. And I can show you some evidence we've got later about how that kind of gradual change is impacting our assets and operations. But what we do know is we're experiencing more extremes, generally hotter, dry summers and warmer, wetter winters. So here's a couple of case studies that are in the London Resilience Review. The 2021 flooding, it's about those more extreme downpours. And because London is not permeable, one of the least kind of permeable cities in the world, the water will increasingly accumulate quickly. And we see those impacts in terms of health impacts on people, but our ability to run the city. Same with the heat wave we saw in 2022. The excess deaths that we experienced, but also the impact it has on everything else that you're trying to achieve. And I think that is one of the challenges with certainly an organisation like TfL. There's so much happening in the day-to-day. There's so much that we're having to deal with on the fly to keep the network running, to keep people safe. That you have this kind of nervous energy and this command and control. And it's how you get people to lift their head up above the parapet and not just clean yourself up after the network is interrupted, get it running again. How do you actually gather all that insight so you can avoid that disruption and rely less on that kind of inbuilt resilience and adapt so you don't have to be resilient. You're just naturally more robust. So some challenges in London which you'll know well, the urban heat island effect is hotter because there's so much more concrete. That's why we need to depave and increase the amount of green infrastructure, nature and trees and shading, and really think differently about how we design our cities. Obviously, we've got the Thames and we've got the Thames barrier, which now has to be upgraded sooner than it was previously. But actually, it's not just about the barrier itself. It's about all the flood defences along the Thames itself. And that's a really complex ownership and challenge in terms of the investment needed to uplift those flood defences so that the barrier is more effective. Very historic built environment, very old city, particularly some of our transport network. Congested built environment as well. There's not a lot of space to work with. And certainly when you're kind of in a transport policy world, that is the constant debate, is how do you use this finite space, this kind of public space in terms of roads? Is it for vehicles? Is it for green infrastructure? Is it flood defences? Is it for walking, cycling? And that is the challenge that we're constantly balancing. I've already mentioned how non-spongy London is, but actually we have a challenge with people paving over their front gardens, which means you get more runoff onto the road network. And we really need to think differently about how we build and how we use that space so that we can absorb those downpours and slow the rate that the water goes into the sewage system, because we're dealing with Victoria sewage system. We cannot afford to upgrade it to deal with the volumes of water, so we're going to have to slow the rate at which it gets into that system. Complex policy landscape. So this is just some flooding, and this is from recent work we did on surface water flooding, and it's very dispersed who is responsible, and lots of people need to work together. In heat, it's even more complex and less clear about who's responsible. It would be better if there was more clarity, but you don't actually need that to make progress. You can just work together and collaborate and try to solve problems, which we are doing, and I'll talk a bit more about. Similar in terms of regulation and governance is also very complex. I mean, that's for most things in life, to be honest, and it's how you navigate that and make progress. So turning now to TfL, so we do have an adaptation plan, and the overarching kind of aim of the plan is to really to support the Mayor's Transport Strategy's kind of single defining goal of mode shift. The more we can get people using sustainable transport in terms of public transport, walking and cycling, the more it opens up opportunity to improve health and well-being and prosperity for the city. And of course, there's a link there with climate impacts. If you've got a not very resilient transport network, it's constantly disrupted, that's going to impact confidence and your mode share target. And we know it is healthier to use public transport and to walk and cycle. So all these things start to play into each other. Of course, protecting our staff, contractors and customers, and understanding the financial implications, which I'll come on to more. I just want to quickly go through the kind of 6 themes in the adaptation plan to really get across this idea of this culture change and rewiring of the organisation that we're trying to do. As I say, it's not about we just do these things, that's job done, we can get back to how things were before. It's really more about how you do things rather than what you do. It's not this is an adaptation project, this is a transport project. Everything you do in terms of the way you operate, the way you build, you need to be thinking about environmental sustainability, and you need to be thinking about how you're building an adaptation and resilience as well as everything else. So leadership and governance is really important, and we started to do that, rewire the system, get it into the management system. It's now part of our budgeting. The Mayor requires us when we submit our budget each year to have a climate budget so that we're tagging what investment is going towards decarbonising and adapting. But of course, there's that conflict there with what I just said. You need it within everything, so that becomes challenging. How do you identify what spend went to adaptation? And I can come on to talk more about that later. But it's also about organisation and people and that kind of culture change. So it's quite easy to get people bought in at a top level about the challenges we face and the need to take action, but they need to know specifically what can they do in their role day to day. And they need to feel empowered and have agency. And that's why having that golden thread from that kind of leadership right at the top, right down into every role in the organisation is so important. So we're doing a lot there to educate people, not only so they know how to build in adaptation and resilience to everything they do, but also going to the points that were made earlier about colleagues, how do they look after themselves under different conditions, and giving them that agency, which I thought was a really fantastic point. Risk management, of course, we've got it was part of our enterprise risk right at the top, and it's how you cascade that down into every part of the organisation and make sure you follow through on your enterprise risks, and really starting to build it into how you think about things like asset condition and our asset management objectives. Interestingly, at the moment, that's only qualitative. What we need to do is build up that evidence and maturity so we can start to look at it in a more quantified way, and we'll come on to that a bit more. Information management. So, we really do need more data and evidence so we can develop the tools to inform decision making. That's the hard truth of it, really. People need to know in every decision they're making, how do they account for, how do they know the benefit of taking the right action that they need to take. And that's a long journey we're on. But this is some work we did quite a while ago, actually. We got a PhD student to look at the performance of the tube in an ambient air temperature. And it's actually one of the first times, a long time ago, I got my asset managers to kind of sit up and kind of take this on board. That this was a problem that they needed to care about, because if it gets too cool, the tube performance declines in terms of delays. Gets too hot, it declines also, and that's different lines, different assets and stuff. So that's kind of early kind of insight into kind of hard evidence about the challenges that we're facing. But we need more parts of the business to understand their area and develop their own information and data understanding. I've already talked about this, building it into everything you do. You do need acceleration activity and kind of blunt tools. So we've done things like said sustainable drainage systems has to be default. So rather than what was the case, people would design a scheme and you'd come in later and go, have you thought about putting in sustainable drainage? And they say, oh, it's too late, we can't afford it. If you can get it in at the start, it has to be one of the options. It's then having to be argued out rather than argued in. And often people get wedded to that initial cost estimate and they feel like that is the cost they should be aiming for. But it's also about building the evidence. So you're really looking at whole life costs. That's one of the challenges I think we face is people look at the upfront costs, but actually a lot of this adaptation will reduce maintenance over time, reduce disruption, can actually improve energy efficiency, things like green roofs and stuff like that. So that's about being a mature organisation with the evidence and tools. Collaboration, communication, reporting. So I've talked about the London Climate Resilience Review, so important that we work together. Here's some work that we've also doing to take that forward, the London Surface Water Strategy, because I've said, it's dispersed the responsibility and water doesn't stop at administrative boundaries. It's not like it just gets to the edge of the borough and goes, right, I'm going to stop here. And quite often the flooding will happen in one borough, but the water will fall in another. So this is about how do we work together, looking at what the water does, so we can work collaboratively to get the right investment and schemes in. So that's a really great example. So I'm just going to end here. This is what I'm specifically, we're doing lots of stuff, but I'm personally focusing on this quite a lot at the moment. This is the work we're doing with the London Climate Ready Partnership around costs. So as I said, you can give people big numbers and they can accept that this is a problem, but then when they come to write a business case for a specific bit of investment or a scheme, they need to be able to evidence why this thing should be included in terms of adaptation measures. But we also need to understand more about how we're specifically being impacted. So we've held this big workshop recently so we can develop this guide that speaks to all the disciplines within an organisation and across sectors, because it's no good just people like me. I need business analysts, I need our finance people, our asset managers, our engineers, our sponsors, all to understand and think about this. So we're trying to think about this 4-pillar approach. So organisations are constantly measuring performance metrics anyway. We obsess over numbers, and quite often it's said, only care about what we can measure. So why don't we have a closer look at what we're measuring and try to understand, as I gave that example earlier, what are the correlations between those performance metrics we already care about and what the weather might be doing. That will start to give you some insight about whether you're experiencing costs or implications to your performance. Then you can use climate risk assessments to extrapolate that and see how it might change over time. So you've got one side of the ledger there. You've got what are your costs likely to be, what are they now, what are they likely to be in the future. The other side of the ledger is more difficult, but trying to identify and track adaptation, spend and investment, and then evaluate the effectiveness. You can really build the tools you need for proper kind of benefit cost analysis and build it into your business cases to get people to make the right decisions and to empower them. So we're going to work on that guide over the next coming months, and we will publish it and make it freely available to all, and hopefully we can build a real community of practice where we're constantly learning and sharing from each other to accelerate progress. That's it from me. Thank you.
There's a story, isn't there, which sort of goes, if you want to get there, if you want to actually, I just wouldn't start from here. And I think that's with London, we've got that problem, isn't it, that there's so much to retrofit. So you can do all the planning, but at the same time, we've got a city that's designed for sort of miserable, sort of cold weather that, I remember from my youth, that it ain't anymore. Super interesting, because, they're just the practicalities of figuring out what on earth do you do to make sort of London fit for purpose with this sort of new weather we're having and new climate. It's a tough one. We have time for questions. I can see the 2 questions. So we've got one there at the back, and then we'll move, if the mic's one there, and then mic come to you here. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Josh Foster, King's College London. You talked a lot about heat and performance metrics. I was just curious about how much consideration there also is for just general health and safety of people riding these lines. I use TfL all the time, and on some of the lines it does get extremely hot and people really struggle. So that was, I guess, one question. The second question was what can you do about high temperatures inside tubes and buses and things like that, and what are the plans?
That's a great question. So at the moment where we're at is, unlike livestock where there is a maximum temperature, they don't have agency about being, using that mode of transport. Our focus is to provide people with the education and the skills in order to make the right choices. So that's why We do a lot to prepare for high temperature, to advise customers. Staff are well skilled in what to do in certain situations, so people can decide for themselves whether it's suitable to use that transport mode and what to do if they are feeling unwell. So that's how we deal with it at the moment. The second part of your question is, how do you cool the tube, is it? Yeah. Yeah, so, I mean, obviously we run most of London's public transport and the road network, and we're a big landowner. We've got commercial development and tenanted estates. So it's not just all about the tube, but the tube is certainly the one everyone, including me, thinks about. So, as was already said, it's a 160-year-old network and was built for lower temperatures and a different time when there was less understanding. So it's really challenging. We do have a Cooling the Tube ongoing programme to look at opportunities. There's 192 trains, tube trains are air-conditioned, about 40% of the network. But some of the network, these deep tubes, are ancient, and there just isn't the space with the ventilation. And also we're struggling with heat generally. What do you do with the heat that you exhaust? If you can't get it out into the atmosphere, it ends up in the tunnels, which is you're kind of fighting a losing battle. And also the clay around these deep tubes have heated up over time, so it's basically like a big heat storage that then means you start the summer already with high temperatures. So it is incredibly challenging, but with the new Piccadilly line trains, they'll have cooling, and we're constantly trying to look for those opportunities. But it's a balance. We don't have limited funding, and you've got a lot of other things you're trying to do, including keeping the network running. So it's not easy. But just going beyond the tube, we need to cool our city, and quite often it's can be quicker for shorter journeys to walk than get on the tube, and it's about educating people, empowering them, and making that street environment cool and freeing up space to have that green infrastructure and those pleasant environments. So it's about the whole piece.
So we have one more question. I'm going to ask the other speakers to come and sit over here while we have the fight. But you still have
okay,
no,
okay.
not you yet. You're still on duty. While we have the final question, just to be efficient. Yeah.
Hi. Nuno Estevez from University of Southampton. Josh kind of stole my question, actually, so I'll try and, you might hate me for this, but I fully agree and appreciate your approach of we're old enough to essentially make our decisions and when to use the tube and not. But when does it become, or what temperatures does it become a TfL duty to shut down the tube, potentially, because it's just unsafe?
We are doing a lot of work to try and understand that. So that's what I would say. So I'm not kind of ruling it out. I'm saying it's an area that's incredibly immature. And we have tried to look at, certainly look at some of our sickness data. But the data itself is quite noisy, and it's quite hard to draw out a trend and see whether there's a correlation. There's other issues about summer days and people taking sick. So it is complex, and it goes back to what I was saying about driving maturity, like it all interlinks. If we can educate people and improve our tools for incident reporting, that will make the data more usable. And we are looking kind of literature reviews and certainly thinking about humidity and heat as well, and providing guidance to staff about how they might work under certain conditions so we can codify that. But at the moment, we don't say it's now too hot to use the tube. And we don't see evidence at this point that it is dangerous to use the tube. It's for because it really comes down to the individual and their underlying health conditions. Do they turn up to the tube already hot? Do they bring water with them? So the key thing for us is education and empowering people and ensuring our staff are well skilled to deal with those situations. That's how we're tackling it at the moment.